Hello, this is Kim Nelson. In this video, we're going to discuss illustrating metal surfaces for jewelry design. This is going to follow a recipe, a series of steps that is predictable and usable on basically any form. The premise is built upon the idea that you have a source of light in the upper left-hand corner at all times, and that will light your object the same no matter what the object may be. There are two rows that we'll be working with in this video. One row of rounds, one row of columns or cylinders. These are basically variants on a disc or a dome. The front view here will show you the profile. In this case, it's a cutaway. There's actually a basin in here, but this shows you the form of the piece. Same down here. And then the top view is what we're going to render or paint. I have a bit of a issue with vocabulary when I'm doing this, because for years we called this rendering jewelry. But now that CAD modeling and CAD imagery has become such a big part of the jewelry industry, renderings now specify or refer to CAD-generated models that are virtually photographed using software applications for that purpose, like KeyShot. So what we used to call rendering is technically really illustration. Myself, I come from an illustration background. I illustrated for many years. So this painting method is I'm going to try and refer to in my videos from now on as an illustration. But forgive me if old habits die hard. So to start, I'm going to put down a base color. The layer assembly here is going to be a layer for paint. That's actually a masking layer. I'll remove that for now. And then you have your, just checking and seeing what else I have here. This is actually a file I used with a teaching assignment. There, this is what we want. We want one file, one layer for your drawings, and one layer to paint on to start. I start with my brush set to around 70%, high 60s, low 70s. The brush I'm going to be using is one I always use for these videos. It's soft, round, pressure, opacity, and flow. It's a basic Photoshop brush that has a light footprint. It doesn't lag much. Set the brush to around 15 pixels. So, as I said, I start with a medium gray. Now, in the interest of time, I could do one of these and just copy and paste. And you'll notice I'm paying very little attention to the boundary of the object. Ironically, kind of like water media, if I, with the opacity set to 80%, as long as I keep overlapping and I don't lift the brush, I can get a very smooth effect. If I lift the brush and come back, it will darken it each time. Okay? So if you want a smooth fill, just don't lift the tip of your brush. Alright, so now that's the medium value. The next step would be a dark value. You want it darker than the base coat, but not terribly dark. Now this is a flat, these are both flat forms here. Actually, these first three have a large amount of flatness to them, but these two are really flat forms, one with a harsh corner, one with a rounded corner. So these will be painted similarly. What you're looking for, I'm just testing that out. That's a little dark. What you're looking for is basically like a 45-degree angle, diagonal slash. And it can be really anywhere. It can be one band or two bands. Okay. Next stage would be the light color, which is substantially lighter than the initial gray, but enough distance from white that your highlights will still stand out. Once again, it can be a single band, it can be two bands. You could set your brush diameter thinner if you wanted more variety, which I will do for that one. Okay. I want a little more variety in brush diameter. I can do something like that. Okay. Then you have the core shadow, which is your darkest shadow. In Photoshop, remember, this sets your color hue, this slider. This sets tint from gray to saturated and up and down. So if you want grayscale, you just slide this all the way to the left and then up and down to get what you want as far as how light or dark. We want almost black for the core. And there's very little of this required. Okay? It could be as little as a single line. Or a single shaded area. It's just to give that full range on a flat surface like this. It's just enough to give you that full range of value. Then you have highlights, which will be pure white. And for highlights, I take the opacity up to 100%. And somewhere 7 to 10 pixels for the brush. And once again, just a band. Now, I can pull very careful straight lines if I want to. Okay? I can do that by taking my time. I can do that by ramping up the smoothing feature on the brush. And then very carefully laying down a line. But that's really not necessary. The truth is that having some variation or movement in the line just adds to the feeling of it being hand painted. And since the way I use Photoshop or Painter or Procreate when I do this is to try and recreate the feeling of gouache, that kind of hand painted feel is perfect for me. You'll notice so far to get light and dark, I've been switching back and forth between white and colored paint. Remember, in Photoshop, white is a paint, which means you're applying pixels. Erasing, on the other hand, removes pixels. So if I activate my eraser tool, I can now come in and clean this up. How clean I get it is not all that important. Remember, at scale, these things will be quite small. However, of the two, the one that's most important to clean carefully would be the sharp corner, because changing the corner, the edges will change the form. On the rounded object that has a slightly rounded corner, it is less of a concern if some of the edge gets erased, because you're going to have a softness of the surrounding area anyway. So I'm actually letting some of that erase away on purpose. Now I could do this with a white pigment as well, but since I am working in black and white for the white metal, I just as soon erase it. Now, as far as the corner treatments on these two, on the crisp edge, you want just a faint line. I'm going to get that with the pigment in this case. Oops, wrong color. like so. To give that some crispness. In the rounded corner, I'm actually going to come in with a gray color. Set this back down to 70% or so. A little larger brush. And create a little shaded ring. Okay. And that will give that feeling of a rounded edge. I can actually amplify that if I want to by coming in here with my brush and doing a soft mimic line to imply that same kind of roundness on both sides. And you can see that will give you a feeling that this one is slightly rounded on the corners and this one has a very hard, crisp edge. Okay. On this particular one, I don't care for how dark that is at the bottom, so I would lighten that out. I would lighten it out either using a color or the eraser. If I'm going to use the eraser, I'm going to drop the opacity so I don't go all the way to white. And just pick that up a little bit. Now, there's a risk of this becoming too stripy. Simpler is better, okay? These both are getting fairly detailed, but they're actually good-sized discs of metal too, so that's not such a bad thing. I'm going to go next to the high dome. Set up a shade color for the brush. For a dome, you want this to fill in like a comma form off on the lower right side of your dome. Light, will fill in somewhat of a comma form. This will also establish some of my reflected light, where light is bouncing back into the dome from the surrounding environment. Then I have my core shadow. Which will be located closer to the upper left, the region of the shadow that is closest to the light source. I can bring in a secondary brushstroke if I want to. Highlight I will catch the rim. I will catch a little bit into the reflected light. And then I will put a highlight on the dome itself. The shape and location of this highlight varies on how high the dome is. The higher the dome, the more towards the center it will be. So I could actually bring this a little bit tighter in that upper left-hand area. I can now add in, drop my transparency, I can now add in some echo lines, some lines that repeat the form and have the feeling of a reflection. I can add in some more minor highlights. Like so. And if this starts to feel too dark to me, I can either come in with a softer gray, or I could use an eraser, fairly transparent, either way, to also add some interest coming in from that side. The low dome actually implies that there's a certain amount of flatness on the top. We're going to go with our shade color. Somewhere in there. And this time the comma form will stay further away from the center. Okay? Light is going to fill in a larger area. Somewhat following that same idea of a yin-yang pattern. And once again, I will create a reflected light. And maybe an accent line. Core shadow. Same as for the high dome. It's going to hug in towards the highlight, the lit side. If I wanted a darker sort of accent line, I wouldn't go with the core shadow. I'd go more with the darker color, not the shade color, not the core shadow. I could come in and do something similar to that, or indicate a 45. It's too dark though. Something like that I could do if I wanted to. Now for the highlight, I want the highlight to stay. Actually, I'm going to leave this at the transparency level it was. The highlight's going to hit right here. And I don't want a round highlight here. I want an oblong highlight that follows the form. Followed up by some accent highlights. Go to 100%. Pick up a crisp highlight at the rim. Okay, now I'm going to use the eraser to clean up. Now, of course, you could use selections or masks to simplify this process. But it usually doesn't take much time. And once again, because I tend to try and preserve a hand-painted feeling, a certain amount of imperfection actually assists me in the effect I'm going for. Not too much. Wanted to put a little bit more light into this dome, so I'll kick the transparency down. And just add a little bit here and there. Actually, the mistake was I didn't want it there, I wanted it here. Yeah. Fine. So there's two domes, low and high. The last one I'm going to do has the basin cut into it. And to do this, I am going to create a mask because it's going to make my life easier at the end of the day. So I'm going to make a new layer. I am going to go with a black brush. 100% opacity. It's a brush, not an eraser. And I'm going to make it slightly larger. I mean, I'm going to try and be careful and keep it pretty close. I am most concerned about the interior circle. The outside I'm not so worried about. Since I work with rotating a lot, it can make you guys kind of seasick watching, but I can't stand to work on a canvas that's straight up and down. It's very uncomfortable for my wrist as far as trying to aim and direct the tool to where I want it. That's fine. And now that I have that, I can continue now working on the flat part, because this corners, this outer rim is a flat surface. So to do that, I will right click on the layer and hit select pixels. I can turn that layer off and go back to my paint layer, and now I can paint directly, starting with a shade color. I would like something a little bit lighter and a bit bigger brush. You don't need a lot of detail to create this effect of diagonal slashing. Here I'm going to use it very minimally. It's also not an exact 45. It's fine. That should be fine. As far as core shadow, I don't think I need any for the top rim, so I'm going to leave it alone. As far as highlights go, just around the edge. So I'm also going to want a little bit of that right here along this edge. Because the light will catch there as well. And maybe a diagonal. There, that's enough. So now if I want to do the basin part, it's the reverse. Actually, I decided I don't like where I put that band. I'm going to put that band here instead. And make it a little wider. See, with that selection, I can come in and play with it, and it's easy. I don't make any mistakes. I'm going to Control-Shift-I to invert my selection. Once I've done that, everything but this, I can't paint here anymore at all. I can only paint anywhere else on the canvas. I'm going to paint here in the middle. I'm going to go back to a shade color. Since this is a basin, it's going to be the reverse of a dome. So the shading, which was down here on a dome, will be over here on a basin. Light will fill in here. Okay, accent line, reflection line. Now that reflection line is going to have more impact if it breaks into that darkness. Like so. And then my core shadow will be placed right up against the rim here. And my highlight will be right here. And I can have secondary highlights located at different locations in the basin. And now I'm going to Control D to remove any selection. And I'm going to use an eraser to clean up at 100%. Okay. There are the 5 circular forms. Okay. They're not perfect. I think this is too busy. I don't think this highlight arc is working. This has too many stripes, but that's fine. The point of this is it's brief, okay? It doesn't have to be perfect. It has to read as the form. And each one of these, that's flat with a rounded edge, that's a low dome, certainly compared to this, which is a high dome, and this has a flat surface with a recess. Those all make sense.